The Isdera Commendatore 112i is a car that looks like the dream of an engineer who was handed the keys to the warehouses of Mercedes, Porsche, and BBS, and then decided to build a German Le Mans machine for the road. It was not just another tuning curiosity or a prototype built solely to shine at a motor show. It was a real, fully functional, road-legal supercar that was produced in a single example and remains one of the most extraordinary machines of the 1990s. The low-slung bodywork, gull-wing doors, centrally mounted Mercedes V12 engine, roof-mounted periscope mirror, active suspension, and rear wing functioning as an aerodynamic brake made the Commendatore look more like a car from a video game than a real vehicle from a small German manufacturer. And that is exactly how many people remember it. Because for an entire generation of car enthusiasts, the Isdera became legendary thanks to the game Need for Speed 2. The problem is that this legend was real. It existed, it drove, it was road registered, and in 2021 it sold at an RM Sotheby's auction for €1,113,000. The story of Isdera begins with a man who did not follow the typical career path within the automotive industry. Eberhard Schultz was a self-taught engineer, enthusiast, and constructor who built his own sports car called the Irritor GTE in the late 1960s. According to one of the most commonly repeated stories, he drove it directly to Porsche in order to convince the company to hire him. He did not possess a traditional set of qualifications, but he had something far more convincing: a car that he had designed and built himself. Porsche actually gave him a job, and Schultz spent years developing his skills in an environment where aerodynamics, lightweight engineering, and technical precision were taken extremely seriously. Later, he also worked with the company B+B, where the CW311 project was created, a spiritual successor to the Mercedes-Benz 300 SL, and at the same time, a car that previewed the future philosophy of Isdera. The CW311 even carried Mercedes emblems, despite not being an official Mercedes model. From this project came the Imperator, and from Schultz's ambitions emerged Isdera, short for Ingenieurbüro for styling, design, and racing. From the very beginning, Isdera was a strange, mysterious, and distinctly German brand in its stubbornness. It did not build cars to compete through mass production, dealership networks, or marketing campaigns. It built them as engineering manifestos. The Spider 033 and 036 were small, mid-engined machines powered by Mercedes engines, while the Imperator became an evolution of the CW311 concept. It featured wedge-shaped bodywork, gull-wing doors, and a Mercedes V8 engine, with styling strongly reminiscent of Stuttgart's cancelled supercar projects. Only a handful, or perhaps just over 20 examples were produced, depending on the source and counting method, which already demonstrated that Isdera operated in a completely different world than Ferrari, Lamborghini, or Porsche. Schultz loved unusual solutions: roof-mounted mirrors, components sourced from various German manufacturers, hand-built production, and absolutely no compromises. The Commendatore, however, was intended to become something much greater. Not simply another niche supercar, but a project that would place Isdera alongside the biggest names of the era: Ferrari F40, Bugatti EB110, Jaguar XJ220, and McLaren F1. The name Commendatore was not chosen by accident. It was a direct tribute to Enzo Ferrari, who was often referred to as Il Commendatore. For a small German company, this was an incredibly bold gesture, almost provocative, because the car was meant to rival the icons from Maranello and Sant'Agata Bolognese. The project was unveiled in 1993 at the Frankfurt Motor Show. The car immediately stood out thanks to its proportions. It was extremely low, long, smooth, and free of unnecessary visual clutter. It measured approximately 4.6 meters in length, 1.8 meters in width, and only 1 meter in height, making it lower than many later hypercars. Its silhouette resembled Le Mans prototypes, with long tail bodies, echoed the Porsche 917, and simultaneously looked like a futuristic interpretation of the Mercedes C111. The front featured headlights sourced from the Porsche 968, while the rear contained clear references to experimental Mercedes prototypes, all wrapped in hand-built composite bodywork. This was not a car designed for mainstream appeal. It was a car designed around speed, aerodynamics, and the obsession of one man. At the heart of the Isdera Commendatore sat the Mercedes-Benz M120 engine, a 6-liter V12 known from vehicles such as the W140 S-Class and later from the Pagani Zonda. In the Isdera, the engine was mounted centrally behind the cabin and produced approximately 414 horsepower, along with around 580 newton-meters of torque. Different sources provide slightly varying figures, but the important detail is something else entirely. At a time when most luxurious Mercedes V12 models used automatic transmissions, Schultz insisted on a manual gearbox. The problem was that Mercedes had never developed a manual transmission for the M120 engine. The solution came from a gearbox derived from Porsche roof engineering, adapted to work with the V12 and fitted with an additional 6th gear. Thanks to this setup, the Commendatore was theoretically capable of reaching around 340 kilometers per hour, while later development studies for more powerful versions even discussed higher speeds. However, the official 1993 Commendatore remains best known as the car powered by the 6-liter M120 and paired with a 6-speed manual transmission. The technical specifications of the Commendatore were impressive, even if not always as headline-grabbing as those of the McLaren F1. The car weighed approximately 1,480 kilograms, featured rear-wheel drive, a 6-speed manual gearbox, Brembo ventilated disc brakes. Acceleration from 0 to 100 kilometers per hour took roughly 4.6 to 4.8 seconds, while the top speed was generally quoted between 330 and 342 kilometers per hour. Later materials also mentioned planned versions with 6.9-liter engines, producing more than 500 and even over 600 horsepower. But serial production never happened, meaning these remain part of the project's unrealized history. Most importantly, Isdera did not simply want to build a brutal car with a huge engine. Schultz wanted to create a fast, stable, long-distance grand tourer capable of potentially competing at Le Mans while still remaining suitable for public roads. Aerodynamics became one of the greatest obsessions behind the project. The Commendatore had no traditional side mirrors because Schultz considered them unnecessary sources of drag. Instead, he used a roof-mounted periscope mirror visible through a special panel in the cabin. The solution looked bizarre, but from the perspective of a man fighting for every additional kilometer per hour, it made complete sense. The drag coefficient was approximately 0.306, an excellent figure for such a wide and low supercar. At the rear sat an active wing capable of functioning as an air brake by rising during braking and improving stability. The car also featured a flat underbody, a diffuser, and active suspension developed in cooperation with BBS and Bilstein. At high speed, the body could lower itself by approximately 3 inches, or around 75 millimeters, in order to reduce drag and increase stability. These solutions still sound advanced today, and in 1993, they were almost extraterrestrial. Structurally, the Commendatore perfectly reflected Schultz's philosophy. Proven components from the best sources combined in a uniquely personal way. The car was based on a tubular steel space-frame chassis, while the body panels were made from fiberglass-reinforced composites and lightweight materials. The suspension drew inspiration from Porsche engineering, often associated with the Porsche 928, but adapted specifically for a mid-engine layout and an extremely low body. Brembo supplied the brakes, BBS the wheels, Porsche the headlights, and Mercedes the powertrain. Such mixing of components may have seemed like a compromise, but in reality it was typical for small supercar manufacturers during the 1990s. The difference was that Schultz was not creating a cheap parts bin special. He selected what he believed were the finest components available, and then re-engineered them according to his own vision. The result was a car that was simultaneously very German, very niche, and utterly unlike anything else on the road. The interior of the Isdera Commendatore was cramped, but not nearly as Spartan as one might expect from a car inspired by Le Mans prototypes. Schultz wanted to create a super-fast grand tourer, so the car included air conditioning, leather Recaro seats, an audio system, ABS, ASR traction control, a large 120-liter fuel tank, and a front luggage compartment with around 200 liters of space. Of course, this was not luxury in the style of a Mercedes S-Class. The cabin was low, focused, and driver-oriented, but there was still a clear attempt to blend extreme technology with usability. One of the defining elements was the dashboard featuring Mercedes components mixed with details sourced from ordinary German production cars of the period. These small details actually make the Commendatore even more fascinating. On one hand, it looks like a futuristic concept car, while on the other, it contains switches and components recognizable from everyday German cars of the 1990s. That contrast gives the car an additional layer of charm, reminding us that great dreams are often built from available parts when the right amount of determination is involved. The Isdera Commendatore also carried racing ambitions. Schultz dreamed about Le Mans, and the car's design, long, low, aerodynamic, equipped with a large fuel tank and a very high top speed, clearly suggested that this was not intended to be merely a showpiece supercar. During that era, the line separating road-going supercars from racing prototypes was particularly tempting. McLaren later took the F1 to Le Mans and won. Mercedes developed the CLK GTR. Porsche built the 911 GT1. And even the Jaguar XJ 220 carried racing aspirations. Isdera was simply too small to realistically challenge such giants, but the concept itself made perfect sense. The Commendatore possessed the proportions, engine, aerodynamics, and philosophy necessary for such ambitions. Unfortunately, dreams collided with financial reality. The project was enormously expensive, and Isdera's funding structure was fragile. When economic conditions worsened in Japan during the early 1990s, where part of the financial backing originated, further development of the car became impossible. Instead of a small production series, only a single example was completed. After its 1993 debut, the Commendatore never entered proper production. The company encountered severe financial problems, and the project was eventually taken over by a Swiss consortium. The car was later modified and reintroduced in 1999 under the name Silver Aero C 112i. In this form, it lost several of its most distinctive features. The golden BBS wheels were replaced, the roof-mounted periscope mirror gave way to conventional side mirrors, and Mercedes badges appeared on the bodywork. The car looked more conventional, but many enthusiasts believed it lost part of its original magic. In this altered state, the vehicle passed through the hands of collectors for years. Only in 2016 did Isdera buy the car back and begin restoring it to its original 1993 specification. The characteristic wheels returned, along with the Porsche Arctic silver paint, the periscope mirror, and the original Commendatore identity. Thanks to this restoration, the world regained the car almost exactly as Schultz had intended to present it during the 1990s. The number of built examples is a subject that requires careful clarification. Officially, there is only one original Isdera Commendatore. The car unveiled in 1993, later transformed into the Silver Aero, and subsequently restored to its original configuration. This is the exact vehicle sold by R.M. Sotheby's in Paris in 2021. However, There is also a controversial story surrounding a second car assembled many years later using an unfinished tubular frame left over from the original project. According to an open letter written by Eberhard Schultz, this is not a genuine second Commendatore, because it was neither built by Isdera nor approved by him. From a historical perspective, the safest statement is therefore this: only one authentic Commendatore was officially built. The second vehicle occasionally mentioned in discussions is more accurately described as a private construction inspired by the Commendatore and partially based on leftover project components rather than an official Isdera production car. This ambiguity only adds to the model's aura of mystery, although provenance remains absolutely crucial for collectors. The value of the Isdera Commendatore is difficult to estimate because there is no comparable market. There is no second original example, no regular sales history, and no standard pricing reference. The most important benchmark remains the R.M. Sotheby's Paris auction in 2021, where the car sold for €1,113,000. Since then, the market for rare 1990s supercars has remained strong, although also more selective. Today, it is reasonable to assume that the original Commendatore could be worth at least as much as it achieved in 2021, and possibly significantly more under the right circumstances. Perhaps somewhere between €1.5 million and €2 million if presented at the right auction with competing collectors involved. However, this remains an estimate rather than a confirmed sale value. The car's greatest strengths are its complete uniqueness, the history of Isdera, the legendary M1-20 V12 engine, its connection to Need for Speed 2, and its status as one of the most fascinating supercars of the 1990s. Why did the Commendatore never become a legend on the level of the McLaren F1? There were several reasons. First, Isdera lacked the brand strength, financial resources, and dealership network necessary to compete globally. Second, the car appeared at a time when the exotic car market was beginning to collapse after the excesses of the 1980s. Third, the Commendatore was simply too ambitious for a company of Isdera's size. Development costs reportedly reached several million euros, and there was no realistic way to recover such investment through tiny production numbers. Fourth, the competition was brutal. During those same years, the world was obsessed with the McLaren F1, Bugatti EB110, Ferrari F50, Lamborghini Diablo, and Jaguar XJ220. A tiny German manufacturer like Isdera could impress a small group of enthusiasts, but it could never break into mainstream awareness. Ironically, it was a video game, Need for Speed 2, that gave the Commendatore a second life. For many people, it was a car first discovered in virtual form before they learned that it actually existed. That digital legacy remains a huge part of the car's cult status today. The Isdera Commendatore remains one of the most fascinating examples of what made 1990s automotive culture so magical. Courage, madness, technical ambition, and the belief that one stubborn engineer could challenge the world's biggest manufacturers. It was not perfect. It never achieved commercial success, and it never competed at Le Mans. But those very failures somehow make it even more extraordinary. It was a car that combined Mercedes, Porsche, BBS, Bilstein, Brembo, and the vision of Eberhard Schultz into a single, irreplaceable creation. It featured a V12 engine, a manual gearbox, active suspension, an aerodynamic brake, a periscope mirror, and a silhouette impossible to mistake for anything else. Only one original example was ever built, and its value today can be measured in millions of euros. Yet the true value of the Commendatore goes far beyond money. It lies in the fact that this car stands as a monument to an era when small manufacturers dared to dream just as boldly as Ferrari, Mercedes, or McLaren. The Isdera Commendatore is not merely a supercar. It is proof that sometimes the greatest legends are not born inside giant factories, but inside the mind of one man who refuses to accept that something cannot be done.